What's up everyone, the veto ceremony has taken place and a vote flip may be in the mix. We've got so much to talk about guys, so welcome to your live feed update. Now straight away guys, I'm going to throw it to you. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is actually a potential flip in the cookout. Would you guys actually like to see a flip in the cookout? Would you like to see someone jump to the other side or just betray the cookout? I'm just very interested to hear what y'all have to say in regards to somebody flipping on the cookout. We saw Big D at the beginning of the day complaining to Kyle and kind of saying, look, rather than leaving me up on the block, how about you take me down and then put Britini up against Claire? Because he thinks that would just seem totally logic. I think Big D is kind of sketched out by Sarah, Beth and Alyssa, not trusting them fully. But I mean, there's not much you can do at that point because the cookout are going to have the numbers anyway. Even worst case scenario, it's a 4-4 vote, and then Carlin would break the tie anyway. So Big D hasn't really got that much to worry about with Sarah, Beth and Alyssa. I mean, if they're going to vote him, they're going to vote him, and there's not much they can really do about that, and it's not really going to affect it anyway. But Carlin was making the argument that leaving Claire on the block would make her kind of lose trust after Carlin had promised her he was going to use the veto on her. You know, Claire is kind of in Tiffany's pocket slightly. Claire is, I would say Claire and Derek X are the ones who are playing the most dominantly on the side of the house that isn't the cookout. So to an extent, I would say that Claire is in Tiffany's pocket to the same extent Derek X is in Hannah's pocket. They are not playing for those people, but they are just tight with them. I would say they've got the most sway on them. So I'm not discrediting nor Claire or Derek X in either of those situations. They are possibly two of my favourite house guests this season. So anyway, you know, Carland obviously made that argument, and obviously we'll get onto the veto ceremony very soon, but I think Big D was kind of a bit about that afterwards. But I mean, after Carlin's promised Claire he's going to use the veto multiple times, and he's kind of dug himself a little bit of a grave this week, it would only do further damage for him to kind of go back on that and not take Claire off the block. Okay folks, veto ceremony talk time now, and it sounds like Sarah Beth might have been able to give Britini a little heads up beforehand. Nevertheless, it didn't really help. So let's talk about the veto ceremony. Alyssa decided not to use the power of veto. And as for Kylan, he decided to use his power of veto on Claire and named Britini as the replacement nominee, leaving our final nominees for the week, who will face the vote on Thursday night, as Britini and Big D. Britini obviously didn't take the news quite well. She was crying to Big D and Arza, kind of saying, look, I don't get it. Why is it me again? 4 out of 6 times I've been on the block. Why am I the house's punching bag? You can't help but feel sorry for her. I mean, that girl's a fighter. I mean, she is just... It is making me a bit like listen, y'all know I wanted Claire to be safe because I think Claire's awesome, but you can't help but feel sorry for Britini because she is a fighter. She's getting out there every single week. She won the veto last week. She's pushing and pushing and pushing. Do you know how many people would have seriously had an absolute meltdown by now if they'd been on the block as many times as Britini has? So it's Big Brother. I get it. I mean, it's the game. They all signed up for it, and if you happen to be on the block 4 times, you have to be prepared for that because guess what? It's Big Brother. But you can't help us just on a human level, not on a game level, on a human level, kind of go, damn, I feel a bit sorry for her. So she was crying, basically felt sorry for us. I don't know if she felt sorry for herself. That was probably the wrong way to phrase it. But, you know, she was saying that, why am I the house punching bag? Why is it always me? And Arza and Big D kind of had no option other than to kind of listen to her and take it all in because they kind of knew what's going to happen, or kind of know what's going to happen this week. And it's that Britini's likely going to be leaving the house. But not necessarily. As spoken about in, you know, the earlier parts of this video, a potential vote flip could happen. So folks, this is where things get interesting. So Arza straight up told Big D that she is going to have to, you know, throw a sympathy vote for Britini and vote to evict Derek F. So what were we talking about before? The fact that 4 members of the cookout can automatically send it to a tie if the 4 on the other side decide, you know, to vote the other way. But with Arza throwing her vote towards Big D, that 4 becomes a 3. So these 3 votes, you know, that's not enough. That's not enough for majority. So if the other sides of the house can get together now and all kind of collectively not tell Tiffany or Xavier what's going on, or anybody in that cookout what's going on, they could totally blindside things and send Big D home. Because I think a lot of them have a suspicion that there is a cookout, but they're all kind of dancing around it and not actually saying it. So, you know, Sarah Beth, Alyssa, Claire, Derek X, and guess what? As a sympathy vote. That's 5. That's majority. Boom. Big D goes out the door, flipping the game on its head with removing a member of the cook. And my Alexa just randomly went off there. I do not know why. She's obviously passionate about the vote flip happening as well. So that's, I've got my little kind of co-presenter right now with Alexa. But anyway, yes, that could totally happen. If they get the 5 votes, to come together, they could send Big D out the door. They would have to do this extremely carefully. It would be a totally covert mission because Claire and DX are the ones who are kind of, thinking of the idea, kind of getting the cogs moving. And I think they kind of brought it up to Tiffany, and Tiffany and Xavier are kind of working on shutting that down. But if Claire and DX can convince them that, okay, it's not going to happen anymore, and then go behind their backs and then do the whole thing with Sarah Beth and Alyssa, then they could totally send Big D out the door. And listen, I mean, Derek X and Claire are kind of social powerhouses, and they could persuade Tiffany. But then again, Tiffany's the social powerhouse more than anyone, in my opinion. So it's tough. I mean, Tiffany's made some enemies this week and last week and the week before, but I still think she is the most persuasive and manipulative person in the house. And I say manipulative in a good way before people start popping off. I respect manipulation when it comes to Big Brother. Don't care what anyone says. It's a game. Manipulation's part of it. So Tiffany can and will get what she wants at the end of the day. But I do think DX and Claire, if they can go about this correctly and kind of realise that the cookout is starting to dominate, then they could send Big D out the door, but they've got to keep a few people in the dark in the process of doing so. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, folks. Would you like to see this happen? Would you like to kind of see Claire and DX infiltrate the cookout and maybe somehow persuade Tiffany to flip? Or I wouldn't say there's much chance of getting Xavier to flip. I don't even think there's much chance of getting Tiffany to flip either. But if they can pull this off with relying on the Arza sympathy vote and, pulling the wool over everyone's eyes, would you all like to actually see that? Hannah and Arza were discussing the fact that Claire and Derek X have been trying to flip the vote onto Big D, and yes, Hannah is contributing to trying to shut that down as well. Hannah's a really good player in my opinion, but the more if we're thinking forwards in the game, what's going to happen over the next few weeks. If Big D does stick around, we saw Hannah and Xavier having a conversation about how after Britini leaves, Big D is going to become the new pawn of the season, the porn star, if you will, and yeah. And basically, I think that is definitely going to translate. Like, I did ask you guys yesterday, who do you think's on the bottom of the cookout? And I saw a mixture of answers between Kyland, Arza, and Big D. So, Big D becoming the porn star would kind of make him on the bottom of the cookout. I think there's a case of Arza and Big D are the least valued members of the cookout, yet Kyland is probably going to be targeted the most in the cookout, if that makes sense. So there's arguments for both sides in my opinion, but I think there's one thing for sure. Tiffany, Xavier and Hannah are definitely the core and definitely at the top of the cookout. That is all of your live feed updates for today, folks. I thoroughly hope you all enjoyed watching. Please let me know your thoughts, folks, in the comment section below of how you're feeling about this week so far. Would you like to see a vote flip? Who would you like to see basically leave the house, Britini or Big D? Do you think Carlin has been a good head of household? Do you think Claire and Derek X are working well enough to flip the vote? I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, so let me know in the comment section below, folks. But I'll say as I always do, make sure that you're all staying safe, staying positive and staying healthy out there, and be kind to one another. But folks, in the meantime, please don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe. But until your next live feed update, I've been your host, Tom Vasey. Good night.